how is Lincoln Riley selling USC, right? Forever and ever, you have USC guys going, it's an internal promotion. It's an assistant who or a coordinator with Pete Carroll, whether it's Sark, whether it's Lane, whatever. And they're saying, we're going to get back to like the national glory of USC football, right? We're going to get back to winning national championships, competing for the best. And now you have Lincoln Riley recruiting kids who have no recollection of that time, right? Like these kids were born during USC's heyday. So it's not like you can go into a living room and say you're going to be the next Reggie Bush or the next Ray Maualuga, because they'll just look at you like, I don't, the guy on Fox? Sure. So Lincoln Riley can now say, okay, we can go back to this, or he can say, this is what we did at Oklahoma. Now we're bringing it to like the bright lights of LA. Is it a combination of both of those things? Is it one of those things? How is USC going to be sold moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's going to be a combination of those things. The weird thing, though, Dan, we still talk to recruits to this day.
Yeah,
that talk about Reggie Bush. Like,
sure.
And I'm like on YouTube, and like for whatever reason,
I can see that. Yeah.
It's so weird. He's just been this player that's recruited for USC for so long after he's been gone. But when we talked to Lincoln Riley initially at the press conference, I mean, he said this could be the mecca of college football, looking in the Coliseum. And it felt like he sort of got it. Some of the nostalgia, some of the like what makes USC unique. There's some different things about it. And there's a lot of, I think, inherent advantages.
Sure.
He seems to be willing to sort of embrace. But I think a lot of it's going to be, too, like the proven what he was able to do at Oklahoma. I mean, getting, back-to-back Heisman winners and another finalist and the college football playoff appearances. I think that's the kind of stuff where USC had the sort of like background of like, this is a blue blood type of program,
right?
But they've never been to a college football playoff before. They haven't won a Heisman in quite a while. They haven't, I don't think the West Coast has had a top 10 Heisman finisher in like 6-7 years, something like that. It's been crazy. And I feel like that's the kind of combination you need to make with the tradition and the, still putting guys in the NFL and all that. But let's get back to winning. Let's do what modern college football teams are doing, and is making the college football playoff, getting in the Heisman ceremonies and things like that. So I think it's going to be more of like a combination of that. But he really did seem like he was embracing. Oh, excuse me. I'm using too much hands. Embracing. He was standing at the top of the Coliseum overlooking, there was downtown LA, you had the Hollywood sign in the background, and you could see he was just like, this is crazy. Like I'm right here in Los Angeles. So
right.
It seemed like that's what he was selling his assistant coaches on, and he's going to sell the recruits on as well. But also obviously his recent success at Oklahoma.
Why do you think the timing was what it was in terms of Lincoln Riley coming to USC? Obviously the job was open. So, you either take it now or you never know when it's going to come open again. Lincoln Riley was operating in Norman. You look at the quarterbacks he was able to bring in, the number of conference championships, the playoff appearances, the Heisman, the number 1 overall picks. There was this sense that like Oklahoma is a blue blood job. This is a national championship caliber program over the course of decades and decades. Why do you think, and this is again, you guessing, but what is the sense that you got where he said, this is the time for me to make a move away from this gigantic place to another huge place?
Yeah, there's something made of this was the first year he didn't win the Big 12.
Right.
But I feel like the momentum was still on Oklahoma's side. I mean, you're going to the SEC. Now that's going to make things harder. Obviously, you're going to this bigger pond with like some pretty big fish in there. But he had one of the top 2023 recruiting classes already, and was really recruiting the heck out of Southern California. So I feel like he was still on some real positive momentum there. It just seemed like this was an opportunity that he could go someplace else, and you were taking a program over from Bob Stoops, and he did an amazing job with it, taking it to another level. But this would be something where he can kind of build it from the ground up. And it's like, well, I have this house I can renovate, and I've done a really good job with it, or I can just complete fixer up. I'm going to tear it down and build it back up again. It seemed like that was part of it, but also, with his family, they talked about his family a lot. Just like, hey, I'll bring my wife and kids. They can be in Los Angeles. They could, hey, honey, I'm working on the weekend, but you take the kids to Disneyland, things like that. It seemed like just an opportunity, not just for him, but the family. Seemed like it was something that was worthwhile. And the fact that he got the buy-in from Mike Bohn and Brandon Sosta on what they would be able to do, it seemed to appeal to him. I know that like a lot of the Oklahoma fans were really upset, and it's tough. Breakups are hard. But this just seemed like a situation that seemed going to work out for him, and that's why he jumped on it.
One of the things that I've talked about when having USC conversations and looking back at what made Pete Carroll so successful all those years ago was he had that base in California recruiting. He had that base in Southern California recruiting. And obviously, I think the city section, and if you don't follow, was in a different place in terms of where football was. And that's the area in the backyard of USC. And it's just different now. But what Pete Carroll did was he made USC itself the destination and would go to New Jersey, Florida, Ohio, Texas, whatever. And that's where he was able to find a number of talents that really fit in with the USC program. It became this national school. Whereas since then, everybody looks at USC and it's like, you can win a national championship with the kids in your backyard, which doesn't seem to be the case when you look at linemen coming out of or not coming out of Southern California and the state of California and the West Coast. Do you anticipate Lincoln Riley having that goal of a national search and not just relying on that local talent, which there's still great, great kids in Southern California and on the West Coast? But do you anticipate him and USC spending in such a way that says we're going to compete for blue chip linemen in North Carolina and in Ohio and in Michigan, whatever? I mean, you can name, it'll take a number of hands to name the top flight kids that came from all over the country that succeeded at USC. Is that something you see happening in the short term?
Yeah, I think so. I think you do have to recruit the local areas, and you're just seeing guys like, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud and, Matt Corral, like all these guys that are Southern California guys having great success somewhere else. Yeah, that's a big deal when you're not getting, Bryce Young was a USC commit. Matt Corral was a USC commit. Both those guys were, and they're having great seasons, in the SEC. I feel like he has recruited Southern California so well already and was able, Oklahoma, traditionally, they go into like Fresno, like Bob Stoops would go into Fresno, Central Valley and take guys. But Lincoln Riley's really stepped it up with, his Southern California recruiting. So I feel like continuing that. And the one thing that Pete Carroll, I think, did that wasn't just good for USC, the Pac-12, the West Coast football, it's just kind of become irrelevant. It's just not been, Oregon had that run. This year they were like in the top, 4 for a while, and they were in the playoff. And then that falls apart, but it just hasn't been all that relevant. And I think when Pete Carroll made it kind of cool to stay home, if you remember like the late 90s, the best players from like the different high schools in California, they were going to like Florida State or Miami.
Justin Fargas to Michigan.
Justin Fargas. Like, he ends up back at USC.
He does.
The De La Salle High School. I forget who was it? DJ Williams. End up going to Miami. There's a bunch of guys, high quarterbacks. When Pete Carroll came over, and it was like, oh, it was kind of cool to stay on the West Coast, which helped USC. But I think it also helped the rest of the Pac-12, because then we're like, oh, we can stay on the West Coast and be relevant. You're playing USC or against USC or with them, whatever. I think that helped. But he also, like you mentioned, you can get a Brian Cushing from New Jersey, or you get a Mike Williams from Florida. And I think you can kind of continue to build that. I feel like that's something that Lincoln Riley is going to have to do. Like Kayvon Thibodeau, one of the greatest players in the country, but there's not a ton of them where there might be 5 of those guys in Louisiana on any given year. You have to really kind of find them in Southern California on the lineman side. And some of them are just like later developing guys that maybe, they work into it and they become, we've seen Utah get the Devin Lloyds of the world that are like have one scholarship offer in the Power 5 and then, become Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. So there's some of that too. But if you want to go out and get the like kind of ready-made lineman, that the skilled and quickness and the size and all that, you might have to go outside of the footprint. So I think he's going to try to do a combination of those things. But step one is probably just keeping some of these guys home, especially the quarterbacks that have just been going out in droves.